Cormac McCarthy is the GOAT for these 5 reasons. The first one being his use of nature in his works. And I want you to imagine right now what holds together the body of work for whoever you think is the literary GOAT. And for Cormac McCarthy, it's his use of nature. And there is no one else out there throughout all the history of fiction who uses nature better than Cormac. I can think of some poets and some nonfiction authors that have written better in terms of philosophically or stylistically than Cormac in regards to nature. But when it comes to literary fiction, Cormac is the GOAT in that regard. Because when we look at the list of greats, whether you think it's Thomas Pynchon or Michel Houellebecq, Don DeLillo, any of the classic authors, what is holding their work together? Where are they writing from? What is their life philosophy? And Cormac, throughout his entire life, was immersed in nature. He understood, because he transcended Christianity at a pretty young age, earth-based spirituality. But even better than that, he understood the dualistic side of nature, which is within all of his works. Because when we talk about the philosophy of Cormac McCarthy's use of nature, there are 2 different sides. There is first, obviously, the mythopoetic side to his use of nature, which means that he embeds the main messages and philosophy within nature throughout his novels, and his characters either notice and grow or fail to see and crumble. And this goes back to the idea of McCarthy's interest in German idealism. If we look at the start of Blood Meridian, he mentions Jacob Boehm. And more importantly, we know that he was a fan of Schelling and Fichte. And when we look at a lot of their philosophy, they believed that God's unconscious created nature, and that God realizes his own consciousness through nature. And that, you could say, is a sense of gnosis. And that's a whole philosophical rabbit hole, but that's a short synopsis of what McCarthy feels. And there's a whole book on this that gets deep into this, called Shreds of Matter, Cormac McCarthy and the Concept of Nature, which is the best book on this topic. And so by McCarthy giving nature the ability to raise consciousness, and maybe even a consciousness of its own, making it a character in the story. That's why there are these long tangents and these long, beautiful passages about nature. And if you examine each novel, he actually writes differently about nature in each one of them. In The Orchard Keeper, it's a little bit more aggressive than his style in The Crossing, because in The Orchard Keeper, the characters are in a fight against nature. The whole book, The Orchard Keeper, no spoilers, is about McCarthy exploring the idea of sinning against nature and what happens to those who do. And then in The Crossing, McCarthy is starting to explore how the modern world is basically making it impossible to be able to exist with nature, or, in the old way. So I could go on for days about the mythopoetic side, but the other side of McCarthy's natural dialect is the fatalistic side, or you could say the more nihilistic side, that nature is cold and unfeeling, and that it is very objective, one of McCarthy's favorite ideas. And he utilizes this just as much also. And this is the perfect blend, because obviously we can put our subjective feelings onto nature and to grow, but at the end of the day, it is unfeeling mostly toward us. And so within McCarthy's work, there's this embedded contrast within nature. And once again, if we return to all of our other favorite authors, and I have a lot too, most of them never even get 1% as deep into nature as Cormac McCarthy. So then the question is raised, then what are they getting deep into? And I personally feel that nature is one of the most potent places for spiritual, physical, mental, and emotional exploration out there, much more so than any other religion. And when we look at a lot of other authors, they are either elevating religion or critiquing religion in the work. If it's postmodernist, they are stuck in this zone where all their axiomatic philosophy that builds their work are a critique of a system that, in my opinion, isn't even real. And so the whole work is flawed. Even though I love it and I understand it and they are very great, it's almost a waste of energy. Or they're making those philosophies like the transcendental signifiers within the work, the major symbols. And as someone who loves to study the Bible as literature, I love it all, and I'm glad that they are doing it. And then, more recently, and you could say this somewhat stems from Dickens and Dickens' whole line, we have a group of individuals who are focusing on the social and on the personal, and you could say the internal, the Proustian problems. And so now the question is, and if we take someone like Cormac uses very little characterization and, more important, interiority. It's one of the most wild parts of Cormac is that some of his novels we get zero interiority about what the hell's going on with the characters. But once again, I love the Proustian authors. Like, if you can pull that off, then there is nothing more trippy to read. Like getting inside someone's head and going with them for, with Proust for a bunch of different books or through a series is very magical. But I believe that trend and where we went with that led to confessional poetry and the confessional, emotionally garbage books that are being published by modern authors and publishing houses today. And the modern style all links back to that. And you could say that our depression links back to that because Proust and all those guys helped build postmodernism. And postmodernist fiction is what television used to blow up. Before, television was effective, but once they started utilizing postmodernist tactics, television became global, became an empire, became the all-seeing eye and influence. And now we live in a very Proustian society, and I would much rather live in a McCarthyian society, or in the vision that he was trying to get at with his characters. And someone, the critique of that would be like, you just want us to regress into a white man idealistic land where we all have a plot of land and walk around like aimless incels. And it's like, no, that means if you think that, then you have no idea what the hell is going on in Cormac McCarthy novels. Okay, so we could talk about nature all day. And McCarthy's so great. The only way to write about nature like that is to spend time in nature and to dedicate yourself to nature for years. So second on the list, it is McCarthy's prose. And McCarthy writes in the King James Bible lineage, especially in Suttree and Blood Meridian. After that, he kind of takes more of a relaxed feel with his last 7 novels. But we could say his first 5 novels are the supreme version of Southern Gothic literature and the King James Bible lineage, which kind of goes from Melville to McCarthy. And then the Faulknerian lineage with Flannery O'Connor and William Faulkner is very deep. But actually, when McCarthy started writing, when McCarthy released The Orchard Keeper, I think in 1963, that was the year before Flannery O'Connor was going to die, and she was already sick at that point. And so Faulkner was already out of the scene for decades at that point. And McCarthy took all their work to the next level by making it postmodernist. And people all the time are like, McCarthy is just ripped off Faulkner. And if you are saying that, and if you believe that, then no offense, as someone who has studied extensively, not just as through self-education, but at university, Faulkner and McCarthy, you are dumb. And it seems like you have a problem and are just trying to tear McCarthy down because other people like him. If we look at McCarthy's first four books, there are stylistic influences and a lot of stuff he does take from Faulkner. But what Faulkner doesn't give him is all the postmodernism of those first 4 books. The Orchard Keeper, Outer Dark, Child of God, Suttree, and we can even say Blood Meridian are all postmodernist. We have in The Orchard Keeper a novel about the fragmentation. It's a fragmentation of a memory. Outer Dark is a dream within a dream, a fantasy novel. Child of God is from the POV of a necrophiliac, which you could say, once again, all these are also at the top level of Southern Gothic style and ambition. And then Suttree is like a mishmash of everything, but has a lot of psychedelic scenes and kind of has a very interesting structure. And then obviously Blood Meridian is just crazy. And so stylistically, he embodies 2 of our favorite styles of literary prose as Americans, as Westerners. All of us have probably read A Rose for Emily, maybe Good Country People, or A Good Man's Hard to Find, or like what others, William Faulkner books. Like Southern Gothic literature is one of the bigger literary movements. It's not as big as modernism or even postmodernism, but I would say it's bigger than naturalism and a lot of those things. A lot of more romanticism, transcendentalism. So Southern Gothic literature is for sure in the like top 5 biggest literary movements of the last 200 years. And you could tie that to Gothic literature in general. And so when we look back and we see that McCarthy was the king of that, and the king of the King James Bible literary style, which you could say is the most influential in all of Western literature, one of the most influential books for English speakers, then those are 2 big feathers in his cap. Who is Michel Houellebecq? What styles is he the king of? Like I said, think of the author in your head. And there are some out there who are number 1, but I'm saying that McCarthy has 2 in his cap. That's like, those two movements, if we just put them in the top 10 biggest movements, if you are first place in 2 out of the top 10, that means that you're pretty close to the top in terms of how good your style is. And so far we have his utilization of nature and his prose. Next on the list, and this might be a little bit controversial because some people think differently, is his utilization of grammar. McCarthy doesn't use quotation marks. Sometimes he'll go on a whole page without a period, maybe one comma in there, just lines upon lines. He has a bunch of other grammatical nuances that I've talked about in other videos, but his ability to innovate and make things work that almost no other authors do, especially putting them all together. You might be able to do one thing, but putting together 5 to 10 different grammatical changes that no one else even does is pretty wild. And on top of this is McCarthy's usage of crazy words. David Foster Wallace when he was talking about Cormac McCarthy, and if you want to see my 30-minute video on David Foster Wallace, how Cormac influenced David Foster Wallace, it is in the Cormac McCarthy course, which is $5 a month, cormacmccarthy.substack.com. Anyway, he said that this McCarthy guy seems like he's memorized the entire Oxford English Dictionary. And the Oxford English Dictionary is out of print now. They don't do the in-print sets. But back in the day, the Oxford English Dictionary would have 10 different volumes, and that would be your set. And it's a huge dictionary. 20 volumes spanning 21,000 pages. And McCarthy, we do know he had a set, and he uses words, sometimes 3 in one page, that if you look them up on Google, you might find one result. And the one result might be someone who's researching Cormac McCarthy and trying to figure out what the word is. And this may seem like a little bit of highfalutin BS, that doesn't make an author good, and I would agree. But when you actually look at the usages and how they create contrast and variability in the sentences, you can see what McCarthy's doing, because McCarthy took years to write his work. He was a pretty slow writer. He didn't sell out like Faulkner and go to Hollywood. And what's crazy about McCarthy is that he must have read the whole damn book, because back in 1960, when I went so deep in the Cormac McCarthy course, I have a 10-hour course on the Orchard Keeper, and I read it countless times. And I'd be looking up some of these words, and I could tell they were very rare, that no one was using these words. And so at some point, he must have been reading these dictionaries and marking them and writing in his notes. I don't know the process of how he is accumulating these words, but the only way when you don't have the internet to find these synonyms or get this stuff is to just read the entire OED. And apparently he has a photographic memory. His sister said that he has an insane memory, and that her statement was that if you read him the first line of a book, he can tell you what book it is, because he's read thousands of books. And he can remember just about anything that he has learned. And seeing his interviews where he was 86, 87, his mind is working very well, and what he's pulling out is pretty good. And in the interview where he gave with David Krauss, and where Krauss is interrupting him, apparently they had talked for hours. They had margaritas together. They had Mexican food. They had hung out for 5 or 6 hours. Then they did that interview. And he was still pretty sharp in that one. And then in the other one, it was said that it was filmed a little bit later in the day after a bunch of discussions and other things. And his brain's still working like that. So anyway, his use of grammar and the utilization of these words is very good. And I've identified some of them that I think are BS. But now I found one the other day while reading Outer Dark. So in Outer Dark, this really isn't a spoiler. This is on the back cover. One of the characters, but spoiler alert for 30 seconds, he puts his baby out in the woods to get rid of it because he had it with his sister and he doesn't want it. And he feels bad about it after leaving out there. So he runs back, and while he's running back, it's dark and there's a flash of lightning. And McCarthy describes how the trees look around him with the lightning strike with the word that means baby, but it's a very weird word. And the way he uses it and how it feels goes with the mood of the story. And you would just think you would just keep reading. But when I look at it now with the definition, I see that he's doing something unconsciously, because I don't want to get too woo here, but I don't give a damn about you logic bros out there. I think that in the collective unconscious, or somewhere out there, we understand all languages and all words. And if you can tap into these things and you can feel it and pull it out of you, that you can understand, especially in your primary language, just about any word and what it really means. And that's the magic of words. Each word has its own magical power. You can say that it's maybe even external and has physical properties that we just can't comprehend or see. And so that's why I think McCarthy utilizes these words sometimes. Sometimes I think it's to show that he's smarter than everyone, but other times it's very purposeful and it layers into the story. So reason number 4 is McCarthy's themes. McCarthy, so once again, let's think about your favorite author, the top 5 people on your list. What are the general themes that they're working through in their works? McCarthy has 12 novels, like 5 screenplays or so, if we count Whales and Men / plays. And the general theme in McCarthy's work is an anti-technological one. It's showing us how civilization and ambition and all these different things are destroying our life. And there are like a bunch of other themes within his work, but it's really tied to nature and the loss of the old world. In his Southern works, it's talking about the loss, the massive changes that happened in Tennessee over a couple decade period, which his father was a part of. In Blood Meridian, it's talking about the loss of the West and the dark side of the West, and that's what we see somewhat in the epilogue. And then in the Border Trilogy, it's talking about how young men in the 1940s in the post-World War II reality can't find solace, can't find freedom. It's almost impossible to see. Then in No Country for Old Men, we have, through Chigurh, this new darkness, this new manifestation of the evil of the world, which makes it impossible for a guy like Llewellyn Moss even to go on a hunting trip anymore. There's evil all around us now. And there are levels of evil that we can't even comprehend. And that's kind of taken to the highest level in The Counselor and obviously The Road. And then in The Passenger, we see a critique of the Manhattan Project, a lot of the main ideals that we hold dear to us. And that's because he started writing that in 1960. So it kind of goes back more with the Border Trilogy, Blood Meridian, Suttree era of his life. And I think those themes are potent because they are the most important. We are losing ourselves in technology and in this world. And honestly, it is very sad. People are now turning to Christianity again and devoting themselves to anything and everything that they can because they are scared of the implications of all this. And I understand. I am scared too. I feel like I've lost parts of myself to this new world, and I feel bad for the future generations that have to come. And McCarthy does this in such an emotional way, though. In The Passenger, he shows it through the sins of the father making Alicia and Bobby really fall in love with each other because they're so screwed up. But then the reason they are separating is also because of the new world. In The Crossing, we see what happens in the scene with the wolf and all the pretty horses. We see certain characters go down. Try not to spoil too much here, everyone, because they are just trying to find freedom. In The Orchard Keeper, the characters, because they've basically been forced to sin against nature, to destroy nature, are now having their own lives destroyed. And the world that they know around them is basically disappearing. And McCarthy watched this as a young boy in the late 1930s, early 1940s in Tennessee. And when I look around and look at what we built, this is not happiness. This is not fulfillment. People are not individuating and finding purpose as a collective, or even at 10%. Even 10% would be enough. They've done studies, and like, for instance, the American Revolution, only like less than 20% of people participated in any capacity in the revolution for any side. So it's closer to 10%, I think. But if we look at the whole American colony and the whole population, most people, 1 out of 5 people really had anything to do with the war at all on either side. But just a small group of people doing something created the revolution that is still existent today. You could say that almost about any revolution. So when we're not even close to that threshold, then there are major problems afoot. And I think all this ties back to McCarthy, to the first 3 points, that he believes that nature is one of the ways to return to this. And through exploring that, through his usage of the biblical and Southern Gothic style, which has and his use of grammar and stuff, that is a very intellectual style. And if you can understand that and get into that, it's going to open you up to a whole new world. As here I am talking about Faulkner, but I love Faulkner and all the other Southern Gothics. Even though I believe McCarthy's at the top, they have so much to teach us. And this also reinforces point number 5 on why Cormac McCarthy is the GOAT. And it's because he was a reclusive author. He never commented on his own works. I can sit here and tell you that Blood Meridian is a feminist book about why women being oppressed is bad. And you could go crazy on the keyboard, but guess what? McCarthy never told us. So I could always say I'm right. There are authors who make sure that everyone knows what their book is supposed to be about. They go on the press tour and someone will say something. They're like, no, that's not what it's about. Kazuo Ishiguro comes to my mind. It's one of the reasons I hate him. Someone will bring up a theory to him and he'll go, oh, yeah, but that's not what I was thinking when I was writing it. It's like, shut up, Kazuo. We'll throw you off the building, bro. But even more so than that, not commenting on his work, I hate to use the word reclusive with McCarthy because he traveled around and he talked to people, and you could walk up to Cormac McCarthy and ask him anything you wanted except about his literature. You could go up and be like, bro, what do you think about whales? And he would genuinely talk to you from everything that I've heard. People would walk up to him in diners and have a conversation with him, and it would go fine. But as soon as you mentioned writing or reading, he'd kind of get all shriveled up and not want to talk about it. And this is some OG stuff, because when we look at guys like Stephen King, who have like ruined their legacy by being on Twitter and like being a joke on commercials and stuff, or even guys like Mishima, who took the writing to the most extreme level, like a goon, like an idiot, then we see kind of what happens with this author persona. And in today's world where everything has been monetized and it's a simulacra, it's almost impossible to escape that. And it was interesting that McCarthy granted 2 interviews that came out before or during the release of his books, because it was almost like he was participating in that marketing for the first time. But holding to his ideal of not speaking about his works cost McCarthy millions of dollars throughout his career, if not more. And that is also one of the reasons why he is the best, because he focused on the work, focused on what he was doing. And that's why I think that almost no one can compete with the old authors, because McCarthy never had a computer and he never had a phone for basically his entire life. And basically you can't go in the world without that anymore. And as we know, these devices are addicting. They're structured to be addicting. Even websites like Google have the news, and the news, once you learn about reality and learn about history, is addicting. And it's much more addicting than reading the newspaper. You could read the entire newspaper and then you're done with the newspaper. You move on with your day. But there is an unlimited pool of trauma and things online that we just can endlessly get into. So that decision to do that built the other 4. That decision gave him the time to go out into nature. It showed him that there are 2 different aspects of nature, that there is the mythopoetic side and the more fatalistic side. It gave him the ability to be able to spend time reading and writing without pressure, not caring about money and ambition, so that he could get to the top of the Southern Gothic and King James style and implement these crazy grammatical changes that no other authors use. It also showed him these different themes. It's basically the foundation of his themes. And then most importantly, it helped him over time accomplish his dreams, because if you sit and you keep writing and you keep doing it, you will get noticed and you will have your breakthrough. And eventually, after 30 years of writing, McCarthy had his big breakthrough with All the Pretty Horses. So, who is your favorite author? Who do you think is the literary GOAT? What did I get wrong? What should I have included about Cormac McCarthy? And if you guys like this video, go check out my video on how simulation theory influenced Cormac McCarthy.